Well, joining us tonight is civil rights attorney Charles Coleman. Charles, that's a question that's being asked again and again by people. Why was not Officer Wilson indicted?
Well, I think when you talk about the grand jury process, what people need to understand is there's only a certain number of people who actually even know what went into the jury and what evidence they actually saw. And in terms of the prior statements that were given by witnesses on YouTube or throughout social media, it may very well have been that there were some contradictions, and the devil's in the details. So when people have changed their story, even if it's only slightly, that may have had a serious impact in terms of how the jury viewed them from a credibility standpoint.
Let's stand back for a minute here for international viewers who may not know the American justice system. A grand jury, of course, is not a trial. Explain what a grand jury actually does.
Absolutely. A grand jury is essentially a closed proceeding with between 8 and 16 individuals who are impaneled by a judge who hear evidence that is presented by a prosecutor. It's not the same standard as you would find at a trial. The standard of proof is lower. What they're responsible for doing is reviewing the evidence which is presented by them and understanding whether, or making a determination as to whether there's probable cause enough to indict or issue formal charges against the person who's accused.
Okay, now that being said, in this country here, there's an old expression, you can indict a ham sandwich. Perhaps you can't indict a police officer. In this particular case here, a lot of testimony here outside of Darren Wilson. You had about 70 witnesses, actually 60 witnesses, 25 days, 70 hours worth of testimony here. Usually it's up to a prosecutor to present a case to a grand jury to prosecute.
Sure.
Do you feel in this particular case Bob McCullough presented a case enough that there could be some sort of evidence that would result in some sort of indictment?
I have to be honest with you. When I listened to Bob McCullough's remarks yesterday, one of the things that struck me as a former prosecutor is I've never really heard a prosecutor talk that much about contradictory witnesses with respect to their own presentation to a grand jury. The thing that people have to remember here is that unlike typical grand juries where people have to make a determination as to whether someone can be accused of the actual crime, there was no question as to who did it. Darren Wilson pulled the trigger. He is the person who was responsible for killing Michael Brown. This was a matter of making a determination as to Wilson's mindset. Was it intentional, and did he act in fear of his own life? Was that justified? So the level of difficulty is a little bit higher because there's a determination that needs to be made as to someone's mindset as opposed to just the usual whether the person can be actually accused of having done it in the first place.
And speaking about the St. Louis County prosecutor, he has a history behind him too. As I think many family members were police officers. His father was shot, and I think the suspect in that particular case was a black man. Yes. The question that we're talking about here is, and I'm listening to this yesterday, about 25 minutes of talking, and I've never heard this much kind of talking. And for me, listening to this, it seems like less is more. But in this particular case, I came away from this with more questions than answers.
Well, one of the strangest things that I thought when I watched Bob McCullough's talk yesterday, I heard blame social media, blame the news cycle, blame the rumor mill, but blame anyone besides Darren Wilson, which was very strange to me. There was no conversation about the level of police culpability or potential responsibility or things that the law enforcement community could do better in terms of interacting with the surrounding community in Ferguson, which I thought was very peculiar. And actually, in that moment, I felt Bob McCullough had actually lived up to his reputation.
Okay, well, this is certainly not over yet. The feds are also involved with this. Charles Coleman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And now we are joined by St. Louis-based journalist Ruella